Sort of a checkered diagonal detail, a pierced cross, and a buck. This again was the Scottish family crest of the Buick family. And I gotta wonder, Rudolph Dieselhead, can you tell me anything about why Dunbar had a buck on his crest? Hey, Steve Mignani here doing the Junkyard Crawl at Bernardston Auto Wrecking with a 1947 Buick Super 50 Series. Now in 1947, Buicks came in the 40 Series, 50 Series, 60 Series, and 70 Series. But this one here being a 50 Series was a fairly inexpensive car when it was new. Now the Buick name goes back to David Dunbar Buick, who was a Scottish immigrant, came to this country as a baby in 1854. But by the 1890s, David Dunbar Buick had made his small fortune with patented a way of bonding ceramic to cast iron, and the white iron bathtub was born. You can thank David Dunbar Buick. If you ever sat down in an old iron tub with white enamel on it, that was Buick's patent. But by 1902, he decided, I'm going to build some cars. And he started building automobiles, fits and starts. By 1905, GM was founded, courtesy of William Durant, on one of the cornerstones being Buick. Now, David Buick was bought out, he's gone, but of course by 1947, Buick was firmly established as General Motors' just under Cadillac luxury division. Now this one here, being a 1947, is one of the very last with the pre-war body. We won't see any ventiports or portholes till 1949. This would have had a handle here, and the hood on this thing could have been opened that way or this way. Speaking of the hood, on the front of it, we see here this odd thing. Now the Buick Tri-Shield crest would arrive in the 50s, but this is the Buick family crest right here, the Dunbar, David Dunbar Buick. Sort of a checkered diagonal detail, a pierced cross, and a buck. This again was the Scottish family crest of the Buick family. And I gotta wonder, Rudolph Dieselhead, can you tell me anything about why Dunbar had a buck on his crest? Thought so. All right, under the hood, let's have a look. Now this is long before Buick came out with their V8 engine. Of course, the nailhead would arrive in 1953, 264 cubic inches, I think it was. But this is the Buick Straight 8. Now again, the first Buick overhead valve Straight 8 came in, I think, in 1931. And these were overhead valve engines. In other words, they weren't flatheads. They had a lot of torque, in fact, tons of torque. 110 horsepower. This is 248 cubic inches. Let me dig in a little bit more. And again, this hood is designed so that it can either be propped left or right, which is very helpful if you're a mechanic working on this thing. And here's the prop rod right here that can go either way. Kind of cool. Now the hinges are gone. Well, let's get the hood out of the way so we can better see the engine. Don't want to scratch that paint. All right, so here it is. This is the 248 cubic inch engine. Now the magic of the Buick Straight 8, a lot of people called it a veritable wall of an engine. It's tall, it's long. And here's the thing, these had a 3.09 inch bore and a 4.125 inch stroke. See, these were 33% under square. What that means is the bore is smaller than the stroke, which is not the recipe for high RPM capability, but makes lots of torque, and that's what these things are all about. These would cruise at 1200 RPM, just a torque-making engine. But here's the thing, in 1941 and 42, Buick actually offered a bit of a hot rod. Right here is the Buick Cadillac from 41, 6 years before this car, but there's compound carburation right there. Two-barrel carburetors, and it says here, less gas for cruising, more air for acceleration. That's what Buick's new compound carburation gives you. One dual economy carburetor meters out a thrifty mixture of fuel for low and high cruising speeds. Two dual economy carburetors supply the extra air that's needed for full throttle zooming. Result, miles per gallon over and above the power economy gains already made with the Fireball piston. So it was standard on all Buicks except for the cheap ones, the specials. But again, dual carbs, 41 and 42, not brought back after World War II. So again, this will have the standard two-barrel carburetor seen on all 248s, even the 320 cubic inch Fireball 8 in the 60 and 70 series big Buicks would have a single two-barrel. 1952, Buick did something weird. They had a single four-barrel on the 320 inline 6 or inline 8, which was, to my knowledge, them and Packard were the only two that put a four-barrel carburetor on an inline 8. Crazy stuff. But again, we see a nice cutaway here of the front suspension. You know, beam axles and leaf springs were gone by the early 1930s. Of course, knee action type front suspension here with an upper and lower control arm. But look how this upper control arm is a forging or a casting. That's a forging. But again, heavy-duty iron, not the stamped steel that we're used to today, and of course back in the 60s and 70s, so pretty rugged stuff. Here is the Houdale style double action piston shock right here, horizontal motion like that. Oil would be squeezed and it would resist jounce and rebound. Brakes on this thing are, they look big. This is a 12-inch cast iron drum right here, but again, only about 1 3/4 inches wide, not that effective. But again, this car only weighed, you know, maybe 3,500 pounds. And again, there were no interstate highways. So this car was not going to be cruising at 70 or 80 miles per hour between Fresno and Los Angeles. This thing would have been cruising along country roads. So big brakes with big stopping capability weren't that important yet. You get into the 50s and these things were actually bad news. 1958, Buick came out with their 12-inch aluminum drum brake and became a leader in the industry. But this is, of course, a decade before that. Something kind of interesting, too, is this 47, one of the last years for what we might call, a portable styling. The door is a flat stamping. You can see right here, the door skin is basically a flat thing with this bolt-on pontoon. And we can see that the theme continues on the back door with this bolt-on pontoon added to the otherwise flat door skin. In fact, on the front fender, this is from an Oldsmobile. We can see here basically how General Motors utilized an inexpensive stamping bolted to a flat door to give each division its own look. You weren't fooling me. But again, this was the beginnings of General Motors, you might say planned obsolescence, wherein every year the car had to have a whole new look, and that's how to do it cheap. Now, if you're like, maybe a Rolls-Royce or something like that, you would actually make the door skin one piece, a lot of handwork, lead, filler, that kind of thing. But GM banged these things out by the tens of thousands, and this is how they did it on a budget. Inside, this of course is a four-door sedan with a full pillar. There were no hard tops for another couple of years. Buick would be one of the first. This one has a 3-speed manual transmission. You can see the clutch pedal down low. And the funny thing on this, to start the engine, you would turn the ignition on with a key, but you'd step on the gas pedal. Under the gas pedal was a little switch that would activate the starter. So you had to stab the gas pedal to the floor, that would fire it up, and of course release immediately, otherwise you redline the engine. But again, the gas pedal was the starter on this. It wasn't that uncommon for cars of this period to have the starter button under the gas pedal. And of course, 120 mile an hour speedometer, probably a little bit optimistic, but there was a thing called the Buick Century, which was the 50 series car with the 320 inline 8. That could go 100 miles per hour, which was the whole point of the Century nameplate, which first arrived in the late 30s. So the Buick Century was an early hot rod. Now this, of course, being a four-door, let's take a look in the back. And I'm sure if this could talk, there'd be a lot of stories we could and some we couldn't share, I'm sure. But look how the armrest here is built out like that, kind of in the way. But again, the ergonomics of this thing were a bit of a compromise. But again, the auto industry from year to year improves its game. Let's take a look in the back. Kind of streamlined here. The gas filler hidden under a door, kind of an advanced detail right here. Whereas instead of like on a Ford, it would be a little knob hanging off the side, like a bump on a log, but not here. Let's look inside the trunk. Yeah, I like to use the term commodious, not commode, but commodious, and that's what we have here, lots of room. The spare tire well right here. The spare would sit vertically in that little slot. I'd first have to clean out the years of newspaper and rodent home. And around here, kind of cool, the taillight on this is a 2-component item. Here is the brake light. This looks like maybe a reflector. And around here, yet more. Sort of a reflector built into the fender, streamlined. This little sort of a blister, kind of a cool effect. And over here we can see the rear suspension. Now, while Buick had coils up front, they also had them out back. And there is one of the coils. Now, Buick had torque tube drive. In other words, the drive shaft was enclosed in a torque tube and fed its propelling force into the frame. There's a cross member up front. So the rear suspension was free to just go up and down and not necessarily propel the car. But here are the links right here. This is sort of an anti-dive link right there. Actually, shock absorber, there we go. Anti-roll bar, there's the rear suspension. Fairly simple on this thing, really. No leaf springs again. There's the Buick rear axle. Here's the inspection cover. Somebody dug into this thing, was doing some kind of work, but this is a Salisbury type. But it's also a Hotchkiss because the front and the back come off. But on this one here, the rust is, you can kind of see right through that. It's not so good. But anyway, rust wins in the end. But here's one of those Buick 12-inch drum brakes. But you can see it's big, but it's narrow. That's the problem. The surface area on this thing was probably, well, it was adequate for this car, but not much more. Back seat here. Yeah, more treasures. Oh, Aunt Thelma's hand-knitted carpet. Kind of nice right there. Take that to the thrift store, make some money on it. That's cool. Up front, here we go. Some hydrogen peroxide, kind of nice. The clock, like symmetrical left and right effect right here. Dashboard is wide open. And something kind of cool, this one was born with a radio, and we look up here on the roof, there's a knob that basically allows, I guess, some degree of tuning, because on the outside of the header panel is the antenna for that AM radio. And as I turn this knob, what happens? Yeah, we can tune in radio stations, I guess. There you go. So AAF, WCCC, KPCC in Pasadena. Yeah, you hear them all. Kind of cool. Of course, no FM radio in 1947. But that's the story of 1947 and how Buick was pulling out of the potato era of styling. No Ventaports yet, a couple years later. But again, straight 8 power, which was standard fare in Buick from 1931 all the way through 1952, when, of course, 53 of the Nailhead V8 arrived on the scene and displaced this engine literally and figuratively forever. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to the Steve Maggs YouTube channel, ring the bell, hit the like button, and of course the bell is important. That'll tell you when the next video comes out, which is tomorrow morning. Till then, we'll see you with more Junkyard Crawl tomorrow.